June 11th, 1944. Near the hedgerows south of Bayeux, Normandy. The morning fog clung to the fields like damp wool, muffling the distant thud of artillery and the crackle of burning farmhouses. Oberfeldwebel Karl Drexler wiped a smear of condensation from the Tiger's cupola periscope as the engine of his Panzer VI rumbled beneath him. The smell of hot oil and metal pressed thick in the turret. Flies hovered near the open hatches, drawn to the heat. The Tiger moved cautiously along a narrow, sunken lane, its treads grinding loose earth into deep furrows. Drexler's gunner, Unteroffizier Rolf Mertens, kept his hands on the elevation wheel, scanning for movement through his gun sight. They had tangled with Shermans for days, and every time it was the same. The American tanks fired first. The rounds sparked harmlessly on the Tiger's front like gravel thrown at a steel door. Then Mertens would fire once, maybe twice, and the Shermans would burn. Drexler trusted that rhythm. The war had rules out here. The Tiger ruled the battlefield. Nothing the Allies fielded could change that. The radio crackled. A distant platoon leader called out armor movement near the hedgerows. Mertens leaned into his sight and adjusted the focus. Nothing yet. Just the wall of thick green leaves. A warm wind pushed the fog aside and sunlight speared across the field. Hauptmann Vogel stood in the turret of the lead Tiger 50 meters ahead. He raised his binoculars and paused as if something caught the light. A gunshot echoed, sharp and unfamiliar. The impact slammed into Vogel's Tiger with a metallic shriek. The shell punched clean through the front plate, a brutal flash bursting from the exit wound in the rear armor. For a heartbeat, the tank remained silent, still crawling forward on momentum. Then black smoke billowed from the turret and Vogel collapsed out of sight. Drexler froze. That was no Sherman. Mertens snapped into action, swinging the turret toward the direction of the shot. Drexler scanned the field through his cupola prisms. And there it was. A lone tank partially hidden by a hedgerow gap. A silhouette that looked like a Sherman. But the barrel was unmistakably longer. Far longer. The next flash came before Drexler could shout a warning. The second Tiger in line convulsed as the round tore through its glacis and detonated inside. Flames erupted from the hatches. Mertens cursed and traversed to engage, but Drexler could already see it. Their enemy had them outranged. Whatever that Sherman carried, it was cutting through Tigers like they were tin. The radio erupted with frantic calls. German crews demanded identification. Some insisted it must be a new American weapon, or perhaps a British trap. Drexler steadied his breath as he prepared to order a reverse. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat fueled by a rising awareness. The battlefield had changed in a single minute. Someone out there had turned the once mocked Sherman into a predator, Mertens, spotted the target again, and called out distance. It was nearly 1,000 yards. Drexler felt a chill crawl up his spine. For the first time in the campaign, they were being hunted at ranges they believed impossible. Drexler gripped the hatch rim as his Tiger reversed into the shadowed lane. The engine's deep growl filled the turret, rattling loose casings on the floor. For years, the Germans had held the advantage in armor duels, and every man in Drexler's crew felt the shock of that balance tipping. Mertens tracked the hidden tank, waiting for a clear shot, but the enemy stayed still, disciplined, patient. Whoever sat behind that long gun knew exactly what they were doing. For most German tankers, Shermans had been little more than targets. The M4 was plentiful, easy to produce, and mechanically reliable. But on the battlefield, reliability meant little when facing Tigers. German crews joked that the Sherman was a coffin waiting to be lit. They laughed at its thin armor, its short 75mm gun, its tendency to erupt in flames after a single penetrating hit. Some called it Tommy Cooker. Others simply saw it as proof that Allied factories valued numbers over quality. Across the Channel, British tank crews knew those jokes all too well. Men like Lieutenant Andrew Markham of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry had spent the first years of the war fighting in undergunned Crusaders and then Shermans that left them painfully outmatched. And Markham remembered the sound of German 88s whistling overhead, and the helpless feeling of firing round after round at a Tiger that might as well have been made of stone. Reports from Tunisia and Italy told the same story. Shermans could not reliably penetrate the frontal armor of Tigers or Panthers unless firing from dangerously close range. British commanders wrote urgent requests. They needed a tank that could kill heavy German armor before it closed the distance. The answer came not from building a new tank, but from transforming an existing one. British ordnance officers had developed the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, a long-barreled weapon firing high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, capable of punching through nearly any German tank at combat ranges. Its shot could reach out beyond 1,000 yards. On paper, it could defeat a Tiger. The problem was mounting it. Early attempts to place the gun into British tanks failed. The recoil was immense. The breach was enormous. Turrets lacked the room to traverse or elevate safely. Engineers needed a stable, mass-produced chassis with enough space to modify. They turned to the Sherman. It was not ideal, but it was available in thousands and had a turret ring strong enough to withstand the recoil if reconfigured. British workshops began tearing apart Shermans under intense pressure. Turrets were carved open, radios were relocated, breech blocks were rotated sideways to fit. Counterweights were added to manage the gun's length and balance. Every modification has to be improvised, tested, rebuilt, and tested again. Crews training on prototypes admitted that at first glance, the new weapon looked absurdly long, almost unwieldy. But when the gun fired, everything changed. Its rounds screamed from the barrel faster than anything Allied tankers had ever used. Suddenly, they had the potential to kill a Tiger head-on. As D-Day approached, the first Fireflies rolled toward the coast. British armored regiments were assigned a few per troop, each Firefly carefully positioned to deliver the killing shot, while standard Shermans provided cover. Crews painted their extended barrels with disruptive stripes to hide their length from German observers. For the men chosen to crew them, pride mixed with quiet fear. They knew they held the key to stopping the heaviest German armor, but they also knew they would be marked for destruction the moment the enemy recognized them. Back in Normandy, Drexler steadied his breathing. The Tiger had long been the master of the long-range duel. The idea that a Sherman could strike from 1,000 yards felt impossible. Yet the facts were burning on the road ahead. 2 Tigers destroyed before they even saw their attacker. In the blackened wreck of the lead tank, flames still licked from the turret ring. A creature of steel and fire had entered the battlefield, wearing a familiar silhouette but carrying a weapon no one on the German side had believed the Allies could field. The Sherman had a new sting, and the Tiger crews would need to learn its name fast. They called it the Firefly, a gentle name for a tank built to shatter giants. Months before Drexler's Tiger found itself ambushed in the Norman hedgerows, British engineers and ordnance officers worked through sleepless nights in cramped workshops across southern England. The invasion of Europe loomed over every design sketch and welding torch. Each man understood what failure meant. If the Germans landed their Tigers in force against lightly armed Allied armor on French soil, the cost in lives would be catastrophic. In a converted factory outside Birmingham, Major George Brighty of the Royal Armoured Corps watched mechanics hoist a massive 17-pounder barrel over a stripped Sherman turret. Bridie had spent months arguing that the Sherman could be forced to accept the gun with enough modification. Many doubted him. The breech was too large, the recoil stroke too long, the turret interior too cramped. British and American officers insisted the Sherman had reached the limits of its firepower. Bridie refused to accept that. He worked with Lieutenant Colonel W. Chatsardur, G.K. Kilbourne, and teams of engineers who improvised their way past every obstacle. They removed the Sherman's original gun, shifted the radio into a rear turret bustle, shaved internal armor plates to create space, and rotated the 17-pounder breech 90 degrees so it could slide past the gunner rather than into his chest. Counterbalances were welded along the barrel to keep it from dragging the turret forward. It was inelegant, crude in places, but it worked. In early tests on Salisbury Plain, the first modified Firefly prototype fired its 17-pounder into a German Panzer III hull set on a ridge nearly a mile away. The shot struck with such velocity that shards of armor exploded out the rear like a storm of razors. Observers stood stunned at the impact. For the first time, an Allied tank gun could match or exceed the fearsome firepower of the German 88. Production began in secret. Only a handful of men in each workshop even knew the purpose of their modifications. Fireflies were funneled into newly trained crews at an urgent pace, their numbers still too few to reveal openly. Their long barrels were so distinctive that brigades painted disruptive white and dark stripes along them to trick German spotters into misidentifying them as normal Shermans. Firefly commanders learned quickly that their tanks would be targeted first in any engagement. Survival meant blending in until the moment they fired. Lieutenant Andrew Markham still remembered the first time he sat in the cramped Firefly turret. The metal smelled of fresh paint and grinding dust. His gunner, Trooper Hugh Dalton, tested the elevation wheel and listened to the long barrel shift with a heavy metallic sigh. Markham placed a gloved hand on the breech. It felt colder, heavier, more purposeful than anything he had ever commanded. He imagined what it would do to a Tiger at 1,000 yards and felt a flicker of hope that had been absent through years of fighting better armed enemies. In training, Markham's troop lined up against mobile silhouettes that simulated German armor. Dalton loaded armor-piercing rounds with a practiced rhythm, the cartridges clinking against the metal floor. The Firefly's recoil rocked the tank hard whenever Dalton fired. Dust falling from turret seams as the round tore out toward its mark. They practiced calling ranges, adjusting for wind, identifying weak points in Tiger armor. The men drilled the sequence until every movement felt instinctive. When the invasion fleet assembled, the Fireflies boarded transport ships under tarpaulins meant to hide their unusual profiles. Their crews watched the dark horizon from the rolling decks, unsure of what waited across the channel. Some whispered that they finally had a gun the Germans would respect. Others wondered if they would even survive long enough to fire it. Then came June 6th, Normandy. Chaos, smoke, scattered landings, and confused units pushing inland under constant fire. By June 11th, Markham's troop had reached the hedgerow country south of Bayeux. As they advanced through narrow lanes choked with brush, Markham kept his Firefly carefully angled behind standard Shermans. He repeated the same mantra to Dalton and the others. Fire only when you can kill. Stay hidden. Do not give away the barrel. Now, in Drexler's Lane, with 2 Tigers burning, the Firefly crew that had taken the shots held their position in perfect stillness, exactly as trained. Their commander knew that if they moved, the advantage disappeared. If they fired again without relocating, the Germans might pinpoint the flash. The entire battle hinged on discipline and patience. The men in the Tigers were only beginning to learn that the battlefield had changed because British workshops, improvisation, and stubborn will had forced a weapon of extraordinary power into a tank the Germans believed would never threaten them. And the Fireflies had only just begun to appear. The Fireflies had only just begun to appear, and already the weight of their presence could be felt in every troop that crept through the Norman buckage. The hedgerows formed towering walls of tangled roots and earth, sometimes 6 feet high, choking off visibility and reducing armored warfare to a series of close, violent ambushes. Each lane felt like a trap laid by centuries of farmers who never could have imagined steel monsters would one day battle through their fields. Lieutenant Andrew Markham's Firefly rolled slowly behind a stand of thick brush, its engine low and steady. Trooper Hugh Dalton kept his hands on the traverse controls, eyes fixed on the gun sight. Markham listened to the distant thunder of shell fire and the muttered radio reports of enemy armor to the east. The 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry had been probing the German lines all morning, and the message was the same everywhere. Tigers ahead. Markham felt the pressure rising with each report. Their troop held only one Firefly, one chance to counter the heavy armor pushing through the countryside. The other Shermans, reliable but outgunned, relied on him to break through the thick German hide. The moment he fired, the enemy would know exactly which tank to kill. Far to the north, Drexler's Tiger ground backward through the sunken lane, treads tearing at the mud as the crew tried to force distance between themselves and the unseen threat. Drexler pressed his eye to the cupola prism again, searching for movement. The longer-barreled Sherman hadn't fired a third shot. It remained hidden, waiting for the Germans to panic, reposition, or reveal a weakness. Inside the Tiger, Mertens swore under his breath as he adjusted elevation. He had never feared a Sherman before, not once. Now he imagined a thin barrel tracking him from somewhere among the leaves, waiting to strike the moment he stopped moving. Sweat dripped down the side of his face despite the cool morning. German commanders in the area scrambled to understand the sudden loss of 2 Tigers. Initial reports suggested American tank destroyers, perhaps a towed anti-tank gun. Others argued it must have been an aircraft strike. The idea that a Sherman could cut through the heirloom armor of the Panzer elite at 1,000 yards seemed absurd. But as radio transmissions from other sectors arrived, a pattern emerged. Long-barreled Shermans, penetrations at extreme distance, crews caught unaware by weapons that should not have existed. By noon, German field officers issued a warning to every armored platoon in the sector. Be cautious of Shermans with extended barrels. Prioritize them. Destroy them immediately. The Fireflies had been revealed. In the hedgerow pocket northeast of Drexler's Tigers, Markham's troop pressed forward. The narrow lane bent sharply ahead, opening onto a low meadow flanked by thick brush. A perfect killing ground for either side. Markham ordered a halt. Dalton scanned the meadow inches at a time. The air tasted of dust and cordite drifting from earlier fighting. Leaves fluttered in the faint breeze, the only sign of movement. Then a shadow flickered near the far tree line. Dalton focused the sight. A boxy silhouette. A long gun barrel shifting with an unmistakable authority. Markham felt his chest tighten. Panther. The Panther's 75mm high-velocity gun could turn any Sherman into scrap in seconds. Markham leaned forward, whispering range markers. Dalton steadied his breath, thumb resting on the trigger. Their loader, Corporal James Rollins, already clutched an armor-piercing round slick with oil. Just as Dalton called out the final range estimate, another engine rumbled to the Panther's right. A second shadow. Then a third. A full Panther platoon was forming up, sweeping the meadow with the confidence of hunters. Markham forced his voice steady. The Shermans behind him needed direction. He issued short, calm commands into the radio, ordering the standard Shermans to hold position and keep their profiles hidden. The Firefly alone would engage at range. That was their role, their burden. Dalton closed the sight until the Panther's mantlet filled the crosshairs. Markham counted the seconds under his breath. The slightest wrong movement, and the Panthers would see them first. Across the battlefield, Drexler's Tiger crew took position on a ridge overlooking the meadow, unaware that Markham's Firefly waited below. The German commander steadied his nerves and searched for targets through the rising heat haze. Every man on both sides felt the tension stretching like wire. Dalton exhaled, barely loud enough to hear. The battlefield held its breath. And in that frozen instant, the future of Normandy's armored fight balanced on a single pull of the trigger. Dalton pulled the trigger. The Firefly lurched as the 17-pounder roared, the recoil hammering through the turret and shaking dust from every seam. The shell streaked across the meadow, a thin vapor trail cutting through the morning air. Markham followed its flight by instinct, waiting for the telltale burst. It struck the lead Panther just below the gun mantlet. The round punched through the front plate as if it were burlap. A violent flash erupted inside the turret, followed by a plume of black smoke bursting from the commander's hatch. The Panther's engine stalled mid-rumble. Its gun sagged. Dead. Wait. Dalton was already adjusting for a second shot. Rollins slammed another armor-piercing round into the breech with a practiced shove. The empty casing clanged against the turret wall as it hit the floor. Markham called the next target, his voice tight but precise. A second Panther had swung its turret toward them, its commander pointing frantically. Dalton fired again. The second shot carved a clean line across the meadow and struck the Panther's left side just behind the road wheel. The tank rocked from the impact, then fire spewed from the lower hull as ammunition cooked off. The turret trapped its crew inside with a muffled boom that sent a shockwave through the hedgerows. Across the ridge, Drexler watched the Panthers die in stunned silence. He had seen Shermans burn 100 times. He had never seen them kill heavy armor at this distance. He lowered his binoculars slowly, unable to reconcile what he was witnessing. His gunner, Mertens, muttered under his breath, the words trembling. 2 Panthers destroyed in seconds, at extreme range, with impossible precision. Markham's Firefly remained hidden, its barrel angled slightly upward as Dalton re-aimed for a third target. The remaining Panther in the meadow began reversing wildly, its driver panicking. The turret jerked side to side, searching for a threat it could not see. The tank crashed through a hedge, kicking up soil as it struggled to flee the invisible enemy. Markham steadied his breath. Dalton fired a third time. The round struck low, just beneath the retreating Panther's turret ring. A jet of flame burst from the top hatch. The tank ground to a halt, its escape cut short by the very weapon German intelligence had once dismissed as Allied wishful thinking. The meadow fell silent, except for the smoldering roar of burning engines. Dalton let out a long breath, sweat dripping from his brow. Rollins prepared another shell, but paused when he realized there were no more targets. Markham listened for the growl of additional engines, but only the crackle of fire reached his ears. He keyed the radio, voice steady. Panthers neutralized. In the distance, Drexler felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The battlefield he knew was gone. Over the last 2 years, the Tiger had been an apex predator. But this new Sherman, this Firefly, had just demonstrated it could kill at ranges even the German 88 struggled to match. Drexler forced himself to refocus. His Tiger still had its armor. Its guns still commanded fear. But now they were facing something different. something built specifically to kill them. And the Firefly was not done. A new Allied formation pushed through a gap in the hedgerows to the south. Shermans, Cromwells, infantry carriers. The armored thrust that had been stalled by German heavy tanks was moving again, emboldened by the Firefly's devastating blows. Markham's troop advanced cautiously, maneuvering around the burning Panthers. The smell of scorched rubber and vaporized fuel rolled across the meadow. Allied infantry, previously pinned, now hurried forward to exploit the sudden collapse of German armor. Dalton wiped grime from his sight lens and watched smoke coil skyward. He whispered almost to himself, "They'll know about us now." Markham nodded. Once the Germans understood what had hit them, they would adapt. They would hunt Fireflies first. Every engagement from this moment forward would be deadlier. But on this field, on this day, the Firefly had announced itself with absolute clarity. The tank the Germans laughed at was gone. In its place stood a weapon that broke the myth of German invincibility at 1,000 yards. In its place stood a weapon that broke the myth of German invincibility at 1,000 yards. But as Allied forces pressed deeper into Normandy, the Germans learned quickly. Word of the long-barreled Sherman spread through armored regiments with the urgency of a fire alarm. Tank commanders received new standing orders. Identify the Firefly first. Kill it immediately. By late June, Drexler's Tiger battle group received a briefing inside a small orchard surrounded by abandoned farm tools. The officers gathered around a field table marked with hand-sketched maps and reconnaissance notes. Oberstleutnant Richter, a hard-edged veteran of the Eastern Front, jabbed at a charcoal drawing of a Sherman silhouette with a dramatically extended barrel. "This tank is your primary threat. Not the standard Shermans, not the Cromwells. This one." Drexler studied the sketch. The proportions were unmistakable. Long, thin barrel. Tall turret that sat slightly higher than German designs. The Firefly. The name alone irritated him. It sounded harmless. But the wrecks of Tigers and Panthers now scattered across hedgerows said otherwise. Richter continued, "They are few, but they are fatal. They have range, discipline. They hide well. When you see the long barrel, engage without hesitation." Some tankers grumbled. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The Tiger had never been forced to fear a Sherman. The shift in battlefield psychology was disorienting, almost insulting. Yet no one could deny the losses. Later that evening, as Drexler inspected the glacis plate of his Tiger, he found a small gouge where a shell had ricocheted days earlier. A standard Sherman round. Harmless. He ran his fingers along the rough metal and felt a quiet frustration. That comfort was over. Now a single well-placed shot from an unseen enemy could end his crew instantly. A few miles away, Markham's Firefly advanced with a squadron through another hedgerow maze. The mood inside the tank had changed since the Panther ambush. The crew felt pride yet carried an unmistakable weight. Every man understood their new place in German doctrine. Rollins said it aloud during a lull in movement, his voice echoing off the turret walls. "We're the first target now." Markham nodded. He could feel it too. The enemy knew the Firefly's silhouette, knew its power, knew the damage it had already dealt in the bocage. Dalton checked the camouflage stripes on the barrel through his sight. They still held, though dust and rain had begun to smear the paint. He wondered how much longer the deception would fool German optics. As dusk settled, their troop halted near a gutted barn. Distant machine gun bursts flickered along the distant line. Occasionally, the thunder of an 88 rolled across the valley. A reminder that the Germans still held many cards. Radio chatter crackled with the clipped voices of neighboring units. Panther sighted near the Orchard Road, requesting Firefly support. Sherman's pinned by dug-in Tiger overwatch. Need long gun. Fireflies became the answer to every call for steel capable of punching through German armor. And that meant Fireflies were overworked, overstretched, and increasingly exposed. Markham studied the map illuminated by a dim red lamp. They would move at dawn. The path ahead cut through narrow lanes bordered by steep hedgerows. Perfect terrain for an ambush. He pressed his thumb into the paper, tracing the likely German positions. The enemy would not wait to be hunted anymore. Somewhere out there, Drexler and crews like his were preparing too, learning how to read the landscape for the faint glint of a Firefly barrel, the subtle shift of leaves that betrayed a hidden shot. They trained gunners to spot the long silhouette even in the worst light, drilled loaders to have a sabot ready for instant engagement, and ordered drivers to zigzag through killing zones to disrupt Firefly aim. The hunter had become the hunted, and the next clash would not be decided by surprise, but by the brutal clarity of who saw whom first in the narrow, suffocating lanes of Normandy. The next clash would not be decided by surprise, but by the brutal clarity of who saw whom first in the narrow, suffocating lanes of Normandy. Dawn broke under a low gray sky as Markham's Firefly rumbled forward behind two standard Shermans. Moisture clung to the hedgerows, turning every leaf into a glistening mirror that caught the rising light. Engines growled in steady unison, the convoy inching through a corridor barely wide enough for a single tank. Markham kept the Firefly angled slightly back, its long barrel hidden beneath an overhang of tangled roots. Dalton scanned each bend before they reached it, the gun sighting left and right, in rhythmic sweeps. Rollins whispered the ammunition status under his breath like a prayer. They carried enough AP rounds for a few engagements, but not enough for a prolonged fight. Ahead, the lead Sherman halted. The radio cracked to life. Enemy armor reported near the crossroads. Possible Tigers. Markham stiffened. He recognized the tone of the caller. Urgent, clipped, brittle with fear. Tigers in the bocage were a nightmare. Their thick armor turned most Allied shots into sparks. Their 88s could reach out across lanes and fields and kill before the Shermans had time to react. Markham keyed the radio. Understood. Firefly repositioning. He ordered his driver, Lance Corporal Sutton, to pull to the right, tucking the Firefly into a shallow depression masked by a curtain of vines. From this angle, they would overlook the crossroads, but remain hidden as long as they didn't move. Dalton shifted the gun into position. The meadow beyond the hedgerow lay quiet. Too quiet. When tigers were near, silence was a warning. On the opposite side of that same meadow, Drexler's Tiger emerged from a sunken track. Its treads churned the wet earth, leaving deep grooves in the soil. Drexler surveyed the terrain. His instincts, sharpened over years of fighting in Russia and North Africa, told him danger was close. His gunner, Mertens, scanned the hedges with the 88's massive sight mount. Drexler murmured to himself, Sherman positions likely. Visibility poor. Watch the flanks. The Tiger crept forward. A second Tiger followed, then a third behind it. A full platoon. Markham heard the distant rumble before he saw movement. The low, chest-shaking vibration of German heavy armor. Dalton tightened his grip on the traverse wheel. Sutton held the Firefly completely still, barely daring to breathe. Leaves rustled on the far hedgerow as Drexler's lead Tiger pushed through. Its massive hull forced aside the foliage, revealing the angular menace of its turret. The 88's muzzle glinted faintly. Markham felt the familiar spike of fear. One shot from that gun, and the Firefly would cease to exist. Dalton whispered, "Range 900. Adjusting." Rollins prepared an armor-piercing round, fingers trembling slightly from adrenaline. But Drexler saw something first. A glint, a reflection. Something slender, metallic, half hidden beneath the vines. Mertens locked onto it. Long barrel. Sherman height. Tiger target identified. The words were as lethal as the shell about to follow them. Markham's heart slammed in his chest. The Tiger's turret rotated in their direction, slow and heavy, like a guillotine descending. Dalton saw it too, and swung the Firefly's long gun the final inches needed to fire. Markham steadied his voice. "Fire!" Dalton pulled the trigger. The 17-pounder barked. But the Tiger fired in the same instant. Both guns flashed. Both shells screamed across the meadow. Dalton's round struck first, slamming into the Tiger's mantlet. Sparks exploded across the armor, the blast staggering the German tank. But the shot gouged only a crater. It had not penetrated. A heartbeat later, the Tiger's 88mm round impacted the hedgerow, just feet short of the Firefly. The explosion tore through the vines, showering the tank in dirt, shrapnel, and shredded leaves. The blast knocked Dalton momentarily back from his sight. Markham shouted, "Reload!" Rollins rammed another AP round into the breech with a grunt, muscles burning from the force of the recoil earlier. Dalton pulled himself forward, eyes narrowing, hands steadying the sight picture. Across the meadow, Drexler's Tiger recovered, turret grinding back onto target. Mertens adjusted elevation, preparing the shot that would end the Firefly. Dalton whispered to himself, "Come on, come on." Markham leaned closer. "Take the shot." Dalton centered the crosshairs on the Tiger's turret ring, the vulnerable seam between its armored fortress and the swiveling crown above. He exhaled and fired. The Firefly shook violently. The round blasted out with a crack that echoed off the hedgerows and vanished into the morning haze. This time the Tiger did not shrug. This time the shot found home. The sun slipped lower behind the hedgerows west of Rowray as Sergeant Harold Carter wiped dust from his goggles. His Firefly, call sign Lion 2, idled at the edge of a narrow farm track bordered by tall wheat and crushed stone. The July heat hung heavy, trapping the scent of diesel and cut grass inside the open turret. Corporal James Wilkes scanned through the periscope while Private Ernest Malloy checked the ammo stowage, running his trembling fingers along the brass casings of the 17-pounder AP rounds. They knew the German counterattack was coming. The British infantry along the ridge had already reported tank engines to the east. Carter adjusted his throat mic and listened to the radio net. The voices came clipped, strained. A recce patrol had spotted at least 4 Tigers moving across fields, broken by low stone walls. The terrain was perfect for them. Open enough for long-range gunnery, firm ground for heavy tracks, and sloping fields that let them crest a rise like iron beasts lifting from the earth. Carter felt the sharp pulse in his neck as he gripped the turret ring. His Firefly had the reach to kill them, but only if he saw them first. Lion 1, positioned 50 yards ahead behind a thick hedgerow, whispered over the radio, "Contact east. 200 meters. Turret silhouettes. Tigers for certain." Wilkes's voice cracked with a low warning. "Tiger left. Hull down. Range maybe 1,200. Carter snapped his eyes toward the shimmer of wheat. There, rising like a stone tower above the crop line, was the thick, square edge of a Tiger's mantlet. It had not yet seen them. If it fired first, the Firefly's thin armor would peel open like a can. Carter felt the metal floor vibrate under his boots as he ordered the driver to halt. Wilkes called corrections. Bearing 95. Depression slight. Hold fire until I mark. Malloy breathed fast through his nose as he lifted another AP round, ready for loading. He had seen what Tiger shells did to Shermans. Crews did not escape. They vanished in fire. The Tiger shifted its turret, searching. The hull stayed still, angled, its commander likely confident that nothing Allied could threaten him at this distance. Carter steadied the 17-pounder's long barrel. His sight picture quivered with the tank's gentle engine vibration, a small adjustment. Then Wilkes muttered softly, "Fire." Carter squeezed. The Firefly rocked back with a deep metallic thump. The 17-pounder's recoil slammed through the turret. Malloy shoved another round into the breach before the smoke even cleared. Wilkes shouted, "Hit! Lower mantlet! It's pulling back." But the Tiger did not retreat fast enough. Carter saw the burst of black smoke bleed from beneath its turret. The German crew hesitated, maybe stunned, maybe in disbelief that a Sherman had struck them clean at 1,000 yards. Carter ordered the second shot. This time the round slammed into the Tiger's ring, a white flash. Then fire burst out of the commander's hatch. The massive tank lurched sideways, treads grinding uselessly before the engine died in a choking cloud. Before the Firefly crew could swallow their relief, Wilkes caught movement on the right. 2 more Tigers breaching a stone wall in line formation. Their cannons pointed directly toward the British ridge. Carter swung the turret. The 17-pounder's barrel hummed as it cut through the air. The Tigers halted, both turning their turrets toward Lion 2. Carter shouted for reverse. The Firefly jerked backward, treads kicking loose dirt. A Tiger fired. A shockwave cracked across the field. The shell sailed overhead and smashed through the tree line behind them. Carter felt his nerves catch fire. Another miss like that, and they would not survive the next. Wilkes gave a new range, 1,100, slight left. The Tigers kept coming, confident, emerging fully from the dust. Their giant silhouettes towered over the wheat. Malloy shoved another AP round into the breach. Sweat darkened the fabric of his sleeves. Carter aligned the gun on the nearest Tiger. He exhaled slowly and fired. Another heavy blast. The recoil shoved the turret crew off balance. As the smoke drifted away, they saw sparks erupt in a fountain across the Tiger's glacis. The shot ricocheted upward, defeated by the thick frontal armor. The Tiger answered instantly. A shell tore into the ground just yards in front of Lion 2. Dirt exploded against the Firefly's armor, rattling bolts and shuddering through the crew's bones. The driver flinched, gripping the controls with shaking hands. Carter steadied himself and swung the turret a fraction right to line up the second Tiger. Wilkes shouted the correction. Malloy loaded. Carter fired again. This round landed true. It punched through the Tiger's left front plate, and the entire tank shuddered violently. Its turret slowed mid-turn. Smoke curled out of the cupola like a dying breath. But the surviving Tiger had zeroed them. Its cannon barked. Carter watched the muzzle flash bloom like lightning across the field. He braced, every muscle rigid as iron. The incoming shell tore through the wheat in a streak of pulverized dirt and shattered stalks. It struck the ground just short of Lion 2, detonating in a roaring column of soil that hammered the Firefly's hull with the force of a sledge. Carter felt the turret lurch violently as clods of earth rained down, clanging against the armor like iron fists. The driver threw his arm up to shield his face as dust poured through the hatch seams. Wilkes wiped grit from his eye and shouted, "Miss! Barely. They've corrected. Next one will be dead on." Malloy grabbed an AP round with trembling hands. Carter could see the fear in him, a raw electric tension that ran through the whole crew. The last Tiger was still advancing, its massive tracks chewing up the field, its turret grinding with cold precision as it realigned on the Firefly. The German crew was determined to kill the tank that had humiliated their formation. Carter forced his breath steady and barked at the driver. "Hard left. Move to defilade. Now!" The Firefly jerked into motion, engine groaning as it angled behind a swell in the terrain. Wheat threshed against the hull, long stalks dragging across the steel plates as they sought even the slightest cover. A shell whistled overhead and exploded against the far hedgerow, ripping branches into splinters. The blast shook the air with a deep, hollow crack. Wilkes spotted the Tiger's turret tracking them through the moving wheat. It was too close, too fast. He called out, "Gun ready. Target right at 90. It's crossing open ground." Broadside. Malloy slammed another round home. Sweat streaked his face as he backed away from the breach. Carter jammed his shoulder against the sight and rotated the turret with calm, practiced precision. The Tiger emerged through a break in the wheat, silhouette vast and dark against the low sun. Its side armor was thick, but not thick enough to stop a well-placed 17-pounder. Wilkes whispered, "Steady." Carter fired. The gun thundered so hard the turret felt like it cracked. A hot rush of air blasted across the crew as the casing ejected. Through the drifting smoke, Wilkes saw the impact. Direct hit, mid-hull, armor fractured, flames licked through the grating above the engine deck. But the Tiger didn't stop. It turned its turret toward Lion 2, slow but relentless. Fire trailed from its wound, but the gun was still active. A wounded predator refusing to fall before taking one more kill. Malloy grabbed another AP round, knuckles white. Carter swung the long barrel again, breath sharp in his lungs. He knew they had one chance to end it. The Tiger halted. Its turret locked onto them. Wilkes shouted, "They're firing." Carter fired first. The two cannons spoke in the same instant. The Firefly's shot punched deep beneath the Tiger's turret ring. The enemy shell flew just west, ripping a furrow in the earth and blasting soil across Lion 2's right track. Then the Tiger erupted. A violent bloom of flame burst from its hatches. The turret jerked upward, smoke belching skyward in a twisting column. The behemoth rocked once, twice, then slumped to a halt. The engine wheezed. Fire consumed the hull. For a long moment, the crew inside Lion 2 said nothing. The only sound was the ticking of their own engine cooling under the stress of battle. Carter exhaled. Wilkes leaned against the periscope and let out a low, exhausted laugh. Malloy sat with both hands still gripping the next round, unable to unclench. Then the radio crackled. British infantry near the ridge reported German armor retreating east. The attack had collapsed. The Fireflies had broken the Tiger spearhead. Carter listened in silence as the reports came in. Across Rewrote Ridge, other Fireflies had similar kills. Shots at impossible ranges, Tiger armor shattered where it had once been invincible. The legend of Panther and Tiger superiority was bleeding out across the wheat fields of Normandy. For the first time in months, Allied tankers felt the balance shift. Carter reached for the radio mic. But before he could speak, Wilkes stiffened. New movement northeast. Fast. Not Tigers. Something lighter. Carter looked through the haze, tightening his grip on the turret ring as new silhouettes emerged beyond the smoke. Through the drifting smoke, faint shapes rippled along the horizon. Smaller, sharper-edged than Tigers. Their silhouettes moved quickly, weaving between the last standing trees at the far end of the field. Carter wiped dust from his eyes and leaned into the gun sight. The forms clarified in the amber dusk. Panzer IVs, at least 3, maybe more behind them. Their commanders were pushing fast, exploiting the chaos left by the shattered Tiger line. Wilkes cursed under his breath and swung the periscope. They're flanking the ridge, trying to cut through the infantry's left. Malloy readjusted the ammo rack, pulling out more AP rounds. His hands still shook, but his motions were automatic. Months of gunnery drills had carved muscle memory that fear could not erase. Carter keyed the radio. Lion 1, shift to new contact northeast. Fast movers, Panzer IVs. We're engaging. Lion 1 responded immediately. Copy. Taking position along the tree line. Carter ordered the driver to pivot onto firmer ground. The Firefly rolled forward, its suspension groaning as it climbed the low rise separating them from the next field. Wheat brushed the tracks in long waves. Dusk deepened into a reddish haze across the horizon, silhouetting the approaching panzers with a glow that made them look almost spectral. The lead Panzer IV fired first, its short flash momentarily piercing the smoke. The shell whistled low and struck the base of the ridge, sending soil and stone flying over a British rifle platoon that had taken refuge near a fallen wall. The infantry dove for cover, shouting warnings into their radios. Carter steadied the Firefly on the crest. The Panzer IVs were advancing in a loose wedge, their commanders confident after years of facing Shermans they could outshoot. They still didn't understand what the long-barreled silhouette in the wheat meant, not yet. Wilkes called the range. 800. Closing fast. Malloy loaded. Ready. Carter lined the crosshair on the lead panzer. The German tank trundled over a break in the earth, rising slightly. Perfect angle. Carter exhaled and fired. The 17-pounder roared, flames scorching the air as the recoil slammed the turret back. Through the clearing smoke, they saw the Panzer's turret snap sideways as if struck by an invisible hammer. Fire burst from its hatch. It lurched, tracks biting once, then stuttered and locked. The tank fell still, black smoke curling into the deepening evening. The other panzers hesitated just long enough for Lion 1 to open fire. A British AP round streaked from the tree line and smashed into the second panzer's hull. The tank jerked violently, then veered off course, its driver likely dead. It skidded to a halt against a mound of broken earth. But the third panzer didn't break. It surged forward, angling toward a shallow depression that would put it out of the Firefly's line of sight. Its turret locked onto Carter's position. A flash bloomed at the muzzle. Wilkes yelled, "Incoming!" The shell slammed into the hillcrest just short of Lion 2. Dirt blasted upward, showering the tank with fresh debris. The Firefly rocked, but the armor held. Carter shifted his position, heart pounding. The German commander was good, a veteran, someone who knew how to duel. Malloy shoved the next round into the breach with a grunt. Ready again. The panzer disappeared into the depression. Carter lost sight of it. Wilkes scanned frantically. Nothing. Nothing. He's repositioning for a side shot. Carter felt a cold prickle claw up his neck. A skilled Panzer IV commander could slip through dead ground and hit them from a new angle before they could traverse the turret. He listened to the engine rumble beneath him, steady but strained. The Firefly had already fired more rounds than most crews saw in a week. Then Wilkes caught motion. Right flank, fast. He's trying to crest the next rise. Carter yanked the turret. Malloy braced himself. The barrel swung toward a low ridge where dust plumed upward. The Panzer IV burst into view, rising like a dark specter against the blood-red sky. Its turret was already turning toward them. Sunlight glinted off its mantlet. Its commander stood half-exposed in the cupola, scanning for the Firefly. Carter locked the sight on the rising hull. His finger hovered over the trigger. Wilkes shouted, "He's on you." Carter fired. The 17-pounder erupted with a thunderous recoil that rattled teeth. The AP round tore across the field, igniting air as it flew. But the Panzer had fired at the same moment. 2 blasts echoed. Carter couldn't see which shell hit first. For a heartbeat, the world froze, suspended between 2 shells flying toward their marks. Carter felt the Firefly jolt violently as a shockwave slammed across the bow. Dust poured over the glacis in a choking curtain. The entire tank shuddered, but no flames followed. No metal shrieked. No armor buckled. The German round had struck the ridge face just low enough to spare Lion 2 by a margin so thin it felt like luck borrowed from another life. Wilkes blinked through the dust cloud. "We're still here. You hit him. You hit him hard." Carter shoved his eye back to the sight, ignoring the ringing in his head. Through the thinning haze, the Panzer IV sat crooked atop the rise, smoke leaking from a wound punched clean through the turret's right side. Sparks danced under the rim of its cupola, where the commander had stood only seconds earlier. Now the cupola was empty. The German officer had either ducked or been thrown clear. Malloy, breathing fast, already had another AP round in his hands. He looked ready to load, but Wilkes placed a hand on his arm. "Hold. He's finished." The Panzer tilted as if bowing under an invisible weight. Its tracks churned once, grinding hard against loose soil. Then the engine sputtered with a rattling cough and died. A thin orange flame flickered through the ruptured turret seam, slowly growing into a wavering torch. Carter let out a long breath, almost a collapse. The tension bled from his shoulders, replaced by a heavy exhaustion. His hands trembled as he lifted them from the gun controls. Around them, the battlefield quieted. Not silence, but the distant thump of artillery, the low calls of infantry, and the crackle of burning metal. All of it fading into the slow exhale of dusk settling over the ridge. Lion 1 reported clear fields, no more movement, enemy armor disabled or retreating. Carter acknowledged with a gravel-thin voice. "Lion 2 holding position, ammo status green, crew intact." Malloy sat back against the ammo rack, staring at the black smoke climbing toward the evening sky. His nerves still jittered, but there was pride beneath the fear now. A dawning understanding of what they had done. Wilkes adjusted the periscope, scanning for any sign of fresh threats. Instead, he saw British infantry advancing carefully across the slopes, rifles raised. Some paused to look at the burning hulks scattered over the wheat fields. Tiger silhouettes twisted in fire, Panzer IVs bleeding smoke into the wind. A trail of steel giants felled by 2 Shermans with long-barreled shadows. The infantry boys approached Lion 2 and raised their hands in a tired salute. One corporal tapped the side of the Firefly's hull with admiration. "That gun of yours. Bloody miracle worker tonight." Carter half smiled but stayed focused on the horizon. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting a deep crimson glow across the fields. Shadows stretched from the wrecks like scars etched in soil. The smell of burning oil drifted through the open hatch, thick and metallic. It clung to their clothes, their hair, their memories. But the ridge held. The counterattack was broken. Carter finally allowed his body to sink back against the turret wall. The adrenaline drained from him in a slow, heavy wave. He could hear the faint hiss of cooling metal from the Firefly's barrel, still warm from the last shot. They all knew what this meant. The myth of German invincibility, once carved into battlefield lore by Tigers and Panthers, had cracked wide open. The Firefly had done what standard Shermans could not. What Allied crews had prayed for since the first encounter with German heavy armor. A British converted tank had outranged and outmatched the beasts of Europe. Carter listened to the rustle of wheat in the evening wind and the soft heartbeat of their idling engine. He looked at his crew, alive, bruised, dust-covered, but steady. Then a new voice crackled over the radio, faint through static. Higher command relaying a message to all Firefly units. Hold the ridge. More German armor massing east of the tree line. Reinforcements uncertain. Expect renewed attack by nightfall. Wilkes froze. More? Malloy swallowed hard and reached for another AP round. Carter stared toward the darkening horizon, where smoke curled like shadows rising from the earth. The Firefly wasn't finished yet. Darkness settled over Rewrote Ridge in a slow, heavy descent. The last line of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, leaving only the silhouettes of burning tanks to mark the battlefield. Flames flickered in the wheat fields, like lanterns swaying in the night breeze. The scent of scorched rubber and gasoline thickened with every passing minute. Carter tightened the chin strap under his helmet and leaned over the turret rim. His eyes strained to read the shapes beyond the tree line. Smoke blurred into shadows. Shadows blurred into doubt. And every shifting line made his pulse rise with the same thought. More armor was coming. Lion 1 repositioned along a sunken lane to the left, its commander reporting limited visibility. Infantry dug in just ahead of the ridge had spread out, forming a thin crescent of rifles and Piets ill-suited to meet another armored push. Carter felt the weight of the ridge settling onto his shoulders. Lion 2 and its 17-pounder were the hinge. If they failed, the line broke. Malloy completed his ammunition count, voice low but steady. AP stocks good. 5 APCR, high explosive as ordered. Wilkes scanned through the periscope, adjusting focus repeatedly as the night deepened. The landscape ahead remained quiet. Too quiet. The Germans had already committed their Tigers and Panthers. A renewed attack meant they were either desperate or reinforced. Neither option favored the Firefly crew. A distant rumble drifted across the fields. Not thunder. Engines, dozens, rolling in slow, grinding unison. Carter gripped the turret ring until his knuckles whitened. Wilkes whispered what Carter was already thinking. That's more than tanks. That's half a battle group. Infantry voices rose along the ridge. Orders passed from one foxhole to the next. Fix bayonets. Load Piats. Hold fire until armor closes the sun. British riflemen braced themselves under the pale glow of burning Tiger wrecks, their faces rigid, silhouettes taut against the broken earth. Then the first hint of movement appeared. A faint line of dots blinking through the smoke. Headlights, quickly extinguished. The shapes behind them moved slowly, deliberately. Carter recognized the low, squat frame as it crept forward into the moonlight. Half-tracks, several of them, followed by Panzer grenadiers spilling out, rifles ready, shadows flowing like dark water across the lower fields. Wilkes tracked the flank. Multiple armor signatures behind them, hard to count. Could be Mark IVs, or worse. Carter steadied his breathing. The Firefly still had the range, it still had the gun, but the darkness erased their advantage. A 17-pounder meant nothing if they couldn't see far enough to strike first. Malloy shoved another AP round into the breech and wiped his palms against his uniform. The turret interior felt smaller in the night, close, hot, tense. A sudden flare shot into the sky from the German lines, casting the battlefield in a harsh white glow. For a brief second, daylight returned, revealing everything in stark, frozen detail. Dozens of infantry pushing forward. 6 half-tracks advancing in a staggered line, and behind them, rolling out from the tree line like shadows given steel, came a new wave of armor. At least 4 Panzer IVs, and behind those shapes, heavier, broader, unmistakable even against the flare's dying light, lurked 2 Panther tanks. The flare burned out. Darkness swallowed the ridge again. Wilkes exhaled. Panthers. They brought Panthers. Malloy closed the breach with a metallic snap, ready. Carter felt his pulse slow, not from calm but from focus, sharpening into something hard and singular. The Firefly had proven itself against Tigers, against Panthers. But Panthers were another challenge entirely. Their sloped armor and lethal high-velocity guns could cripple a Sherman at ranges where even the 17-pounders struggled. But this ridge wasn't falling. Not while Lion 2 was alive on it. Carter keyed the radio. Lion 1, enemy armor confirmed. Half tracks with infantry support. Panthers behind them. Prepare to engage on my mark. Lion 1 acknowledged. Voices tense, engines revving. Then the German assault began. Panzer grenadiers opened fire with green tracer rounds slicing overhead. Mortar flares burst above the ridge. Half tracks accelerated, their engines roaring. And the Panthers rolled forward, steady and unhurried, like predators confident of the kill. Carter lowered himself into the turret. The wheat outside swayed as if recoiling from the coming clash. He placed his hand on the gun controls and spoke with a steady, cold edge. Hold. Wait for silhouettes. The battlefield lit with another flare. Panther hulls gleamed like steel giants rising from the dark. The flare bathed the battlefield in a harsh, unnatural daylight. For a moment, the night dissolved, replaced by a frozen tableau of advancing steel. The Panthers crept forward with the slow, muscular confidence of predators claiming familiar ground. Their angled glacis plates gleamed under the flare's glare, turning them into armored silhouettes carved from silver and shadow. Carter fixed his eye to the sight. The world narrowed into a tunnel of light and crosshairs. The nearest Panther advanced with mechanical precision, its commander exposed in the cupola, scanning for the Firefly's profile. Carter recognized the posture. A veteran. Someone who had hunted Shermans the way a hawk hunts mice. Wilkes tracked infantry movements, voice clipped and controlled, grenadiers splitting left and right, half tracks pushing center, Panthers anchoring the line. The flare dimmed. Darkness rushed back over the ridge. Malloy loaded an APCR round, voice tight. Sabat in. Give me his side and I'll put him down. Carter didn't answer. He kept the turret locked in the Panther's direction, waiting for the next flare, waiting for the next breath of light so the 17-pounder could bite before the German gun did. The Panthers halted in unison, as if frozen by the dark. Then their engines revved. A rippling growl rolled across the fields, a deep mechanical sound that vibrated through the Firefly's armor. Another German flare streaked upward. The battlefield flared white. The lead Panther's gun flashed. Wilkes shouted, "Carter! Down!" Carter barely ducked when the shell screamed past the Firefly's turret, so close it felt like the air itself split open. The round tore through a hedgerow behind them, exploding into a column of dirt that rained back across Lion 2's rear deck. Carter gritted his teeth. He knew what that shot meant. The Panther commander had seen the long barrel. The Firefly was marked. Lion 1 barked over the radio. "Panthers targeting us. We're repositioning." Wilkes pivoted. "Right flank is moving. The second Panther's swinging around." Carter steadied his voice. "We take the lead cat first." The flare burned lower, shadows growing longer. He waited. Malloy breathed through his nose, steady, ready. Wilkes counted under his breath. 3 seconds to black. And then the light died. The world vanished. Only sound remained. Engines advancing. Boots rushing through wheat. Half tracks grinding into firing positions. Carter's heart hammered in the dark. He pressed his ear against the steel, listening for the Panther's tracks, searching for the subtle, grinding rhythm that betrayed direction. There. Left. Slightly forward. Closing. He swung the turret blind. Malloy gripped the breech like an anchor. Wilkes whispered the range based on sound alone. 200. Maybe less. The next flare shot upward. Light swallowed the ridge. The Panther was right there, cresting a low rise, its broad turret turning toward Lion 2 with deadly, deliberate grace. The gun barrel pointed directly at the Firefly's heart. Its commander, illuminated in the flare's glare, leaned forward in the cupola, eyes locked on the kill he was about to take. Carter fired. The sabot round streaked across the glowing field like a blade of white fire. It struck the Panther square in the turret cheek, right where the sloped armor thinned near the mantlet. The steel plate shattered with a violent burst, fragments ripping outward in a spray of molten shrapnel. The Panther lurched, turret jerking as an internal explosion rolled through its crew compartment. Its gun dipped. Smoke belched from the cupola. The commander disappeared inside the flames. Wilkes let out a breath that trembled at the edges. That's one. But the ridge was far from the one. A second Panther pushed through the smoke of the first, its silhouette emerging with cold, predatory focus. Its gun stabilized. Its engine growled. Its armor gleamed under the dying flare. And it was aimed directly at Lion 2. The war ground on. But the lessons of the Solomons stayed with every pilot who ever strapped into a P-38. By early 1944, the Lightning had transformed from an aircraft many mocked to one the Japanese deeply feared. They had learned, over the jungles of New Guinea, the coral atolls of the Marshalls, and the dark waters of the Bismarck Sea, that no matter how damaged it became, the Lightning always seemed to make it home. Veteran ace Saburo Sakai later wrote that the P-38 was one of the few American fighters he genuinely respected, calling its pilots fearless and stubborn, because every encounter with it carried risk, real risk. Those twin engines meant American pilots could dive when they wanted, climb when they wanted, and break away when they had to. They could push deeper, stay longer, escort farther. It was an aircraft that changed the Pacific Air War. One brutal mission at a time, and the stories from the men who flew it still echo today. Like the pilot who returned with his entire right side shredded, landing on one engine and half a wing. Like the squadron that limped home 300 miles with holes the size of pumpkins punched through their tails. Like the day Richard Bong, America's highest-scoring ace, used the P-38's climb and firepower to outmatch opponents who once laughed at it. In the end, the Japanese would no longer mock the Lightning, because they had seen what it could do at its worst, and what American pilots could do when everything was on the line. And so, the P-38 Lightning earned its reputation, not through propaganda, not through myth, but through survival. A fighter that refused to die. A machine that brought its pilots home. A twin-engine beast that turned ridicule into fear, and fear into respect. The Lightning's legacy endures, not because it was perfect, but because it was unstoppable.